They say some of the most unexpected moments in life happen when you think everything is ordinary. I never imagined that a quiet Sunday morning on my sister's balcony, sipping coffee with her husband, could turn into something so quietly profound, something that would linger in my mind long after the mugs were empty. It started with laughter, a hint of the familiar, and then, somewhere between the sunlight and the steam rising from our cups, there was a shift, subtle yet undeniable. I didn't see it coming, and neither did he, yet the air between us held a weight I couldn't ignore. Don't forget subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and write in the comments which city you are listening from. This is very important for us, and now enjoy listening. I had come over to my sister's house that morning with the excuse of helping her organize a few things in the kitchen. She had called me the day before, her voice a mixture of fatigue and excitement, asking me to drop by before the weekend got too busy. Nicholas, her husband, was sitting in the living room when I arrived, engrossed in a book. He looked up, smiled that easy, welcoming smile he always carried, and gestured toward the balcony. "Coffee?" he asked. His voice had that calm quality I'd always found reassuring. I nodded and followed him, stepping out onto the balcony. The morning sunlight was gentle, filtered through the awning above, warming my skin without burning it. The city was quiet from up here, the hum of distant traffic softened by the height and by the quiet of early morning. Potted plants lined the balcony railings, spilling over with green that caught the light. There was a faint scent of jasmine from the neighbor's flowers, mixing with the aroma of fresh coffee Nicholas had brewed himself. We settled into the chairs with our mugs, the wicker cool beneath our palms, and for a while, we just looked at the view. There was a rhythm to it. The quiet sips, the occasional laugh, the shared observation of some passerby below. I don't know what it was about that morning, but something felt different. Comfortable yet charged. Familiar yet tinged with curiosity. "I didn't expect you so early," Nicholas said, breaking the silence. He leaned back, one arm draped casually along the back of the chair, his eyes on mine, but not in a way that made me self-conscious. It was simply present, attentive. "I thought I'd surprise you," I replied, smiling, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the coffee. "Your sister mentioned she had a ton of things she needed help with. I thought I'd be useful before the chaos of the day." Nicholas chuckled softly. "She can be energetic when it comes to projects," he said, and I laughed, nodding. It wasn't just a laugh at a joke. It was a laugh that seemed to acknowledge an unspoken understanding between us, something neither of us could or would put into words. As we talked, the conversation drifted naturally, effortlessly. We spoke about small things at first, books, the weather, the changes in the neighborhood, but then the topics grew more personal. Childhood memories, the way we'd both navigated our late 30s, the quiet regrets we'd held onto. I found myself telling him things I rarely shared with anyone, and Nicholas listened with that rare kind of patience, the kind that made you feel truly seen. I caught myself noticing the little things about him, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the soft callus on his thumb from years of holding coffee mugs just like this, the subtle strength in his hands as he lifted his cup. It was intimate, in the sense that intimacy doesn't always have to be physical. Sometimes it's just noticing, truly noticing someone, and being noticed back. There was a moment when the wind shifted, carrying the scent of coffee and jasmine, and we both paused, just looking out over the city. I felt a surge of something I hadn't expected, a profound sense of connection, a strange, quiet thrill. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was a small, steady hum, something that made my chest tighten just slightly in the best way. "I always forget how nice it is out here," I said softly, almost to myself. Nicholas's response was quiet too, almost a murmur. "There's something about mornings. They have a way of slowing things down, letting you see things you usually miss." His gaze met mine for a heartbeat longer than necessary, and I felt that quiet shift again, that subtle undercurrent, like we had crossed some invisible line of shared understanding. We lingered there longer than I intended. The sun climbed higher, painting the balcony in gold, and yet neither of us seemed eager to move. I realized I was holding on to the warmth of this moment, the way it made me feel alive in a way that was gentle, not overwhelming. I didn't know what this meant, or if it meant anything at all, but I knew that, right then, I didn't want it to end. I finished my coffee slowly, savoring not just the flavor, but the presence of him beside me. There was no rush, no expectation, just a rare, unspoken bond forming in the quiet of a morning balcony. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a little spark of something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. A sense of being seen, understood, and quietly desired, even if only in the simplest way. As the city stirred below, I realized that this was one of those mornings I would replay in my mind for years. The way sunlight caught his hair, the ease of our laughter, the subtle tension that was as respectful as it was electric. Something unexpected had unfolded, and I didn't know what would come next. But I knew one thing for sure. I didn't want to forget this moment. The days after that morning on the balcony seemed to hum with a quiet tension I couldn't quite name. I told myself it was just the lingering warmth of the sunlight, the way Nicholas had listened, the way his presence felt, safe yet exhilarating. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. I kept finding myself thinking about that morning, about the way he had smiled, the way his hand had rested near mine on the wicker armrest without really touching, the way he had truly heard me, not just the words, but the pauses, the little sighs, the hints of doubt I hadn't meant to reveal. I wasn't proud of it, but I realized I was craving that feeling again, craving his quiet attention. A few days later, my sister went out for the afternoon to visit a friend, leaving Nicholas and me alone in the house. I hesitated for a moment before deciding to make myself useful. I told myself I was going to organize the pantry, rearrange some books, maybe help with some of the small household chores. But when I entered the kitchen, I noticed Nicholas already there, sipping coffee, looking out the window with that same thoughtful expression I had found so magnetic that Sunday morning. "You're here early," he said, his tone casual, but there was an undercurrent in his voice that made my pulse quicken. "I didn't want to leave you alone with all this chaos," I replied, nodding toward the scattered papers and half-unpacked boxes on the counter. He laughed softly, that low, easy sound I was beginning to recognize as dangerously comforting. "You always know how to make a mundane day feel different," he said. I smiled, though I felt heat rise to my cheeks. There was a playfulness in his tone, but beneath it was a kind of sincerity that I hadn't expected. It made my chest feel tight, like the world had contracted to the space between us. We worked side by side, organizing papers, wiping countertops, and occasionally exchanging small jokes or teasing remarks. But as the minutes turned into an hour, the conversation drifted again, as naturally as it had on the balcony, toward things we didn't usually share. Stories from childhood, regrets, small confessions that felt heavier for being whispered between us, rather than shouted into a crowded room. "I always admired how patient you are," I said at one point, stacking some folders neatly. I caught him watching me, his eyes lingering in a way that sent a familiar shiver through my spine. Nicholas's expression softened. "And I've always admired your honesty," he said, almost under his breath. There was a vulnerability in his tone that made me want to lean closer, though I forced myself to stay put, busy with the task at hand. We took a break and went out onto the balcony again. The afternoon sun was warmer than that morning, the city below now bustling with life. I noticed little things about him that I hadn't before, the way the sunlight made his hair glint, the slight crease at the corner of his eyes when he smiled, the way he seemed to inhabit the space around him so naturally. For some reason, the world felt quieter up there, even with the sounds of traffic and distant chatter. It was as if the balcony itself had become a little bubble, separating us from everything else. We didn't speak for a long time, just sipped our coffee and let the silence stretch comfortably. Then, without thinking, I found myself leaning slightly toward him, drawn by an invisible pull I hadn't felt before. I felt his gaze on me, gentle but knowing, and it made me nervous and excited all at once. We didn't need words. There was an understanding, a shared recognition that whatever was happening between us was something rare and delicate. "I'm glad we have moments like this," I said quietly. My voice sounded fragile even to me. Nicholas nodded slowly. "Me too. It's nice to feel understood," he admitted. There was a pause, a slight hesitation, as though he were waiting whether to add something more. "Even if it's complicated." I swallowed, feeling the weight of those words. Complicated. Yes, it was complicated. He was my sister's husband. There were boundaries that shouldn't be crossed. Yet, in that moment, all I felt was a deep, undeniable connection. It wasn't just attraction. It was a sense of being seen, being truly understood, being allowed to just be. As the afternoon light softened into gold, I realized we were sitting closer than before. Our knees almost brushed. My heart was pounding, but it wasn't fear, it was anticipation, the thrill of shared secrecy, the intimacy of two people who had found a connection that seemed almost forbidden but entirely consensual in its quiet intensity. We didn't speak of crossing lines or doing anything inappropriate. It was simply the acknowledgement of closeness, a slow-burning warmth that filled the spaces between words and gestures. And somehow, the respect was still there, the mutual understanding that nothing needed to be forced, nothing needed to happen. We were simply present with one another. The moment stretched, and I realized that I had never felt anything like this before. It wasn't lust, exactly. It wasn't even infatuation. It was something subtler, deeper, a recognition that two people could touch each other's hearts without crossing boundaries, that emotional intimacy could be just as powerful as physical closeness. Eventually, my sister returned. The spell broke gently, replaced by laughter, chatter, and the normalcy of life. Nicholas and I exchanged a glance, a quiet smile that carried the memory of the afternoon, the shared understanding, and the promise of unspoken connection. Later, as I drove home, I kept replaying the moment in my mind. The warmth of the coffee, the golden light on his face, the way his presence made me feel alive in ways I hadn't felt in years. And I realized something important. Some connections defy expectation, some moments are rare, and some people leave marks on your heart without ever stepping out of bounds. That afternoon on the balcony had changed something in me. I didn't know where it would lead, or if it would lead anywhere at all, but I knew I wanted to feel that quiet intensity again. And more than that, I wanted to understand it, to explore the depths of this unexpected connection while keeping the respect and boundaries that mattered. It was strange, unsettling, and yet completely exhilarating, and I had a feeling this was only the beginning. A few weeks had passed since that quiet afternoon on the balcony, and somehow, our routine had simply shifted. My sister was busy with work and her own life, and Nicholas and I found ourselves sharing small moments whenever the house felt empty. Not everything was dramatic or overt. Sometimes it was as simple as lingering over breakfast, sharing a quiet joke, or exchanging glances that lasted just a second too long. One evening, I found myself standing on the balcony again, the city bathed in the soft glow of twilight. Nicholas joined me, a mug of coffee in his hand, and we settled into our usual spots. The sky was painted in shades of rose and lavender, the kind of light that made everything look softer, almost forgiving. I felt a familiar flutter in my chest as I watched him pour his coffee, his movements casual but somehow intimate, as if he were performing a quiet ritual that only I truly noticed. "I didn't expect to see you here," I said softly, smiling at him. He shrugged, a small, knowing smile tugging at his lips. "Some habits are hard to break," he replied. His eyes caught mine, and I felt that same warmth, the quiet intensity that had been growing between us since that first morning. We talked about nothing and everything. The city below, books we were reading, memories from our childhoods, dreams we hadn't shared with anyone else. There was a rhythm to our conversation, a gentle ebb and flow that felt natural, like we were slowly mapping the contours of each other's hearts. At one point, the conversation drifted to family. I laughed at a story Nicholas told about my sister's insistence on organizing every closet in the house. He laughed too, that warm, deep laugh that always seemed to make the air lighter. And then, unexpectedly, there was a pause. "You know," he said finally, his voice quieter now, "I didn't realize how comforting it could be to just talk like this." He didn't elaborate, but the weight in his tone made my stomach tighten. I nodded, understanding perfectly. "I know what you mean. There's something rare about it," I admitted. To feel understood without having to explain everything. For a while, we didn't speak. The city lights flickered on one by one, and the sky grew darker, revealing a few scattered stars. I realized I had been holding my mug a little too tightly, my fingers brushing against his every so slightly. I felt him notice because he shifted, closing a tiny distance between us without moving his chair. A subtle gesture, but it carried all the meaning we didn't dare voice aloud. "I've missed this," he murmured, almost to himself. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I let the silence hang, letting the words settle in the space between us. There was something in that statement, something that resonated deep in me, that acknowledged the connection we had been nurturing quietly, carefully. "Me too," I finally whispered, and I wasn't sure if I meant the conversation, the moments of shared understanding, or the warmth of just being near him. Probably all of it. As the evening stretched on, the air between us seemed to hum with unspoken emotion. It wasn't just attraction, it was trust, it was admiration, it was a sense of being seen in a way that went beyond surface level. I noticed the slight crease in his forehead when he thought, the way his eyes softened when he listened, the tiny flicker of a smile that appeared without conscious effort. And then, almost without thinking, our hands brushed again. This time, it wasn't accidental. It was tentative, careful, a silent question asked and answered in the faintest touch. My heart raced, but there was no panic, no guilt, not in that moment. There was only the quiet recognition that we had both felt this before, that we had both wanted this, and that somehow it was okay. We didn't speak, we didn't need to. The moment stretched, fragile and delicate, filled with possibilities that neither of us could, or would, fully name. There was trust in the restraint, intimacy in the attention, and a shared understanding that the connection we had didn't need to be defined by anything more than the emotional closeness we were cultivating. When my sister returned later that evening, the spell broke naturally. Nicholas and I moved apart slightly, smiling at each other with a quiet acknowledgement, a secret shared only between the two of us. It was thrilling and terrifying in equal measure, but above all, it felt alive. As I drove home that night, I reflected on everything we had shared over the past few weeks. The stolen moments, the quiet conversations, the subtle gestures of connection. They had all built something intangible but profoundly real. I realized that what I felt for Nicholas wasn't just an attraction or a fleeting curiosity. It was a recognition of someone who truly understood me, who allowed me to be myself without judgment, and who shared a depth of feeling that had been absent from my life for far too long. I also realized something else. This connection, fragile and exhilarating as it was, came with responsibility. Boundaries existed for a reason, and respect mattered more than desire. But that didn't make the moments we shared any less meaningful. If anything, it made them rarer, precious, a secret garden of understanding and quiet intimacy that belonged to just the two of us. And for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of hope. Hope that even in the most unexpected places, on a balcony with a cup of coffee, in the soft twilight of a quiet evening, one could find connection, understanding, and the courage to feel again. That night, as I closed my eyes, I held onto the memory of his presence, the warmth of his hand near mine, the unspoken trust and respect that had grown between us. I knew that this story wasn't over, not by a long shot, and I had a feeling the next chapter of our connection would be even more revealing, more tender, and perhaps more complicated. It had been a few months since that first morning on the balcony, yet the memories of it of us had grown sharper, more vivid with each passing day. Life moved on around us, my sister busy with her work, Nicholas juggling projects and responsibilities. But somehow, whenever the house was quiet, we found ourselves drawn back to the balcony, to the comfort of shared coffee, quiet laughter, and unspoken understanding. That morning, I stepped out onto the balcony first, the air crisp and carrying the faint scent of the city waking up. Sunlight spilled across the tiles, casting a golden glow over the plants we had nurtured together, and I could hear the faint clatter of dishes from inside as Nicholas prepared coffee. The sound was comforting, familiar, and I realized it had become something I had come to depend on, not the noise itself, but the presence behind it. Nicholas joined me a few minutes later, carrying 2 mugs, his expression calm and steady. "Morning," he said, handing me one of the mugs. There was a softness in his eyes, the kind of gentle attentiveness that made the rest of the world fade. "Morning," I replied, smiling, feeling the warmth of the cup seep into my hands and somehow into my chest as well. We sipped in silence for a few moments, watching the city below. It was quiet for a while, a rare stillness that felt almost sacred. I realized that over these months, we had built a kind of sanctuary together, an understanding that went beyond words, a connection that was respectful, tender, and profoundly human. "You know," Nicholas said softly, breaking the quiet, "I sometimes forget how much I needed this, just talking, being present." I nodded, understanding perfectly. "Me too. It's rare, isn't it? To find someone who sees you without judgment, who listens without trying to fix everything." He smiled, and there was a flicker of something deeper in his expression. Gratitude, perhaps, or relief. Yes, exactly that. As the morning light shifted, I realized that I wasn't just noticing him anymore. I was noticing us. The way our rhythms had intertwined, the quiet trust we had nurtured, the delicate balance of emotional closeness that didn't need to cross boundaries to be powerful. I felt a surge of emotion, a combination of gratitude, awe, and a little vulnerability. "Do you ever think about how complicated it all is?" I asked carefully, almost afraid to voice the thought. Nicholas looked at me steadily. "I do. But I also think about how rare it is to feel understood like this, how few people truly see you. And I think, maybe that matters more than anything else." It was true. The connection we had built was complicated, yes, because of family and circumstance. But it was also one of the most honest, gentle, and meaningful connections I had ever experienced. It was a reminder that intimacy doesn't have to be physical to be transformative, that someone can touch your heart without touching your body, that respect and understanding can create bonds deeper than desire alone. For a long moment, we sat in silence again, sipping our coffee, letting the warmth and quiet settle over us. I realized I felt safer here than I had in years, seen, understood, and valued in ways that went beyond casual friendship. And I also realized that part of the beauty of this connection was knowing it could exist without needing to be anything more than it already was. "I'm glad we have this," I said softly. "This, us, even if it's complicated." Nicholas nodded, and his hand brushed briefly against mine, careful, gentle, a confirmation without words. "Me too," he replied. "It's rare to feel this kind of connection, surely. Rare and important." As the morning wore on, the city fully awake below, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. There was no tension, no guilt, no expectation. There was only the quiet beauty of 2 people who had discovered a bond that transcended the ordinary, a bond built on honesty, trust, and mutual respect. Later, when my sister returned, the house was filled with laughter and conversation. Nicholas and I exchanged a subtle glance, a smile that carried the weight of shared moments and understanding, and I felt a quiet joy in knowing that this connection would endure, even if unspoken, amid the rhythms of everyday life. Driving home that evening, I thought about everything that had happened: the first morning, the afternoons on the balcony, the stolen moments of conversation, the subtle touches, and shared smiles. I realized that life was full of unexpected experiences, some fleeting, some lasting, and that the ones that left the deepest mark were often the quiet, tender ones. I didn't know what the future held for Nicholas and me or how this connection would evolve. But I did know this: I had discovered something rare and precious, something that reminded me of my capacity to feel, to trust, and to connect deeply with another human being. And for the first time in years, I felt entirely present in the moment, grateful for what was and hopeful for what could be. That night, as I closed my eyes, I carried the memory of the balcony with me, the warmth of the sun, the scent of coffee, the soft murmur of conversation, and the quiet, steady presence of someone who truly saw me. It was a reminder that life's most profound moments often come quietly, without fanfare, and that the connections we cultivate with care, respect, and sincerity can last far longer than we ever imagine. And in that reflection, I found peace.